swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth and the reality of the law?
I do. Thank you, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your name for the jury and then spell your last name for the court?
Philip Vargas, last name Vargas.
And what is your profession?
Agent with the New Mexico State Police crime scene team.
And how long have you been with the New Mexico State Police?
Approximately 6 years.
Okay, and what did you say your title or your rank is with the New Mexico State Police?
Agent.
And what are your specific responsibilities with the New Mexico State Police?
To respond to crime scenes, investigate those crime scenes. Most of them are violent crime scenes in nature. Officer-involved shootings, homicides, aggravated batteries.
And have you had training in those things?
Extensive, yes, ma'am.
And can you take us through some of that training?
I've had approximately over 900 hours of fundamental and advanced training in crime scene processing, to include the identification, collection, preservation, packaging of evidence, shooting reconstruction and crime scene reconstruction, forensic photography, crime scene diagramming, and bloodstain pattern analysis.
And have you attended conferences in these matters?
Trainings, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And have you received specialized training in any particular field?
Shooting reconstruction, crime scene reconstruction, and bloodstain pattern analysis.
And does the crime scene investigation, does that include documentation, photographing, and collection of evidence?
Yes, ma'am.
And how many crime scenes approximately have you processed?
Approximately close to 90 now.
And as to bloodstain pattern analysis, does that include documentation, photographing, and collection of suspected blood and body fluids?
Yes, ma'am.
How much training specifically to bloodstain pattern analysis do you have?
I've attended bloodstain pattern analysis training with Bevel Gardner Associates, BPA, which is level 1, BPA level 2. Also the National Forensic Academy in Tennessee. They also had a bloodstain pattern analysis training, so I've attended that as well.
Okay. And how many crime scenes have you processed bloodstain pattern analysis at?
Maybe 35.
Okay. And how much of your time is devoted to the study and examination of bloodstain pattern analysis?
That's probably going to be dependent on the scene circumstances. It could range anywhere between, say for one particular case, anywhere between, say 40 hours to 100 hours for one case.
Okay. And are you a member of any organizations related to your work?
I am not, no ma'am.
Okay. And do you have to maintain any certifications or complete any courses on a regular basis?
We get sent regularly to maintain our training, both in-house training and abroad to those other organizations, bloodstain pattern analysis training out of state. So if we don't offer it in-state, in-house with the New Mexico State Police, we get sent out of state.
And how often does that occur?
Pretty regularly. I probably have attended, for instance, 2 major trainings within a year's time. So one lasting 10 weeks, and then another one lasting 1 week.
And is that typical on a yearly basis?
We get sent, yes ma'am, I would say that's pretty typical, a couple of trainings a year.
Okay. And do you have any other duties as well as in your position as an agent with the New Mexico State Police?
No ma'am.
Your Honor, the state moves Agent Phil Vargas as an expert in the field of bloodstain pattern analysis.
Without objection. Will be so admitted.
So, Agent Vargas, would you explain to the jury the nature of bloodstain pattern analysis?
Bloodstain pattern analysis is a structured approach to evaluating differing bloodstain patterns that follows a scientific method. Basically, we identify bloodstain patterns on scene and classify those patterns based on a certain criteria. We follow a taxonomic classification system, which means that taxonomy is simply a set of rules for classification that derive from biology, that where organisms were classified based on shared characteristics. So what we're looking at when analyzing blood is physical characteristics for specific blood stains against a certain criteria. So if, for instance, one particular blood stain, a cast-off pattern, the classification system would define that as a series of circular to elliptical shaped stains with consistent directional angles and positioned in a linear or curvilinear orientation. So if the pattern that I'm looking at meets that criteria, then I can objectively classify that pattern as a cast-off pattern. If the criteria is not present, then I can't classify it as a cast-off pattern. So that's basically how it works.
Okay, and what do the bloodstains tell you when you apply all of that criteria?
In some cases, they can tell you motion directionality. They can tell you angle of impact, at which angle, whether it be a 90-degree straight down angle or a more acute angle closer to the say for instance a roadway. So if the blood impacted the roadway at a more acute angle, it's something we should be able to see based on the shape of the stain.
Okay, and how did you become involved in the case that we're here to discuss today?
I was assigned by my sergeant, Mark Soriano, with the New Mexico State Police crime scene team. I was called at approximately 10:30 on May 25th and 2015, and was notified that we were to assist Rio Rancho Police Department with an officer-involved shooting where a Rio Rancho police officer was shot and killed. Okay,
and when did you arrive at the scene?
I arrived at the scene approximately 11:30 p.m.
And what were you assigned to do when you got there?
Initially, I was assigned to assist with identifying any evidence found at the scene, and then I was assigned by the crime scene manager to document with still photography the scene as a whole and collect any swabs of suspected blood.
Okay, and did you have the occasion to examine the evidence and the photographs that you took in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so did you prepare something after reviewing all of that evidence?
Yes, ma'am. I was asked to prepare a bloodstain pattern analysis.
Okay. Your Honor, we have a few pictures that we're going to be looking at that were not entered, however they have been stipulated to. It is, just a moment. So, Your Honor, the state moves under stipulation for admission of States Exhibit 462 through 473. Now, Agent Vargas, you said that you had the opportunity to look at the photographs and the evidence and that you prepared something. What did you prepare?
A bloodstain pattern analysis report.
All right. And can Your Honor, may the witness step down to... So, Your Honor, we're going to be using the laptop, and then we may also be cutting to the Almo every now and then. What is this the document that you prepared?
Yes, ma'am. That's just the cover page.
Okay, and I'm gonna let you run this and you can take the jury through what we're looking at as you go through it.
Okay. Typically, when we begin a blood stain pattern analysis, as it pertains to the analysis, sometimes it's important that we wait for any other reports to come in, whether they be firearms reports or reports from the pathologist or OMI or reports from the lab. In this case, it's important that we wait for reports from the lab to get the DNA results. This way I can definitively say whether or not a blood stain was from person A or person B or person C based on the lab results. So that's what I did here. Okay. This is an overall diagram of the scene that was drawn by New Mexico State Agent Clint North. And the red markers indicate what I marked as suspected blood at the time. This is going to be the basically the legend for that diagram. And the photograph to the right is going to be, I marked that as evidence item R1.
So can you tell them what exhibit we're looking at? Okay, now back on the diagram with the red markers, can you tell us where R1 would be? The area that these items would be in?
It would be the very top right.
And the picture on the left is going to be marked as State's Exhibit 462. Now, can you go through that one with us?
Yes, ma'am. Those particular stains I classified as drip stains. Drip stains basically are created when blood is dispersed through the air as a function of gravity. So those stains would be something like if anyone has had a bloody nose or a cut on their finger and it just drips. That's basically what that stain would indicate and how that stain would be created. I also noted that the stains were in no way in any linear orientation. They were randomly distributed. So as if someone or a bloodied object was just kind of walking around that particular area with no order at all.
The photo on the right would be State's Exhibit 49.
Okay, and the photo on the right, within R1, which was the red one cone, I also examined what I classified as a gush splash stain. Now, this stain had irregular margins, which mean that there's spinal or like a spiny protuberance around the margin. It's not, the margin isn't a clean margin. It sort of looks like a goat head, if you will, you know. So it's on a typical round, regular margin item, there would be none of those protuberances. So this particular stain had irregular margins in it. It had a larger volume of blood that appeared to have been made through ejection under pressure. So there was a larger volume, appeared to be at a 90-degree angle. There wasn't any kind of elliptical shaped or elongated shape to it. There was no indication of any other motion other than there was secondary spatter stains that came off of that in central stain in all directions. So that would lead me to believe that the stain was more of a 90-degree stain versus a more acute angle.
And you stated that it was under pressure. Can you explain to us what that means?
Yes, ma'am. Just so when we see a stain like this that has a larger volume that has these secondary satellite stains coming off of the central stain with a lot of spines to it, or spine protuberances around the margin, that indicates to us that there's a lot of pressure in a wound that basically pushes or shoves that blood out. So.
Okay. Moving on.
Yes, ma'am.
Photo on the left would be photo State's Exhibit 463.
Okay, and that's just showing another photograph of the gush splash stain.
And on the right is 464.
Again, just showing another photograph of that gush splash stain.
Photo on the left is State's Exhibit 48.
Okay, R2 on the left photograph.
R2. What is R2 now?
So R2 is going to be, R2 is going to be red cone number 2. So that's going to be evidence item R2 is going to be that.
Could you say that again? That's going to be evidence?
Yeah, evidence item R2.
Oh, I see. Okay. Go ahead.
So it's going to be the top right corner. So that's the photo I'm going to be talking about. So R2, you're going to see spatter stains in a linear orientation. So spatter stains in this instance are created when blood is dispersed again through the air as a function of gravity. Only this time you're going to see those spines on the north side of those stains. And the stains are going to be a little bit less circular, more elliptical or elongated. So that tells me that there was motion to it, and whatever made those stains was moving from south to north.
And the one on the right would have been State's Exhibit 50. Okay.
Okay, and the picture on the left is just showing the same stains, just at a different angle.
Which photo do you want to start with? Left or right?
We can do the top left.
Okay, so the left photo would be State's Exhibit 465.
Okay, and these stains I classified again as drip trail stains. Again, there was motion and directionality in these stains, elliptical shaped stains with spines on the outer edge showing motion and directionality in the stains. Again, the stains had a linear orientation. They weren't randomly distributed. There was a lot of blood stains, but they were definitely more of a linear orientation. The second photograph to the bottom right,
That would be State's Exhibit 466.
showing stains that are moving in a westwardly direction. And those stains are associated with the stains in the top left photograph. It's almost as if the stains in the lower left, lower right photograph, there was something independent that was moving, may have had blood on it, but it was definitely independent of the bigger structure. And so that bloodied object was also moving outwardly in a westerly direction.
So you said that it was important to wait for the lab results. Why is that?
Because this way I'm actually able to say whose blood, suspected blood that was at the time.
Okay.
I didn't have that information, so I'd wait for the lab to get that information.
I see. And so now are you able to identify where this is coming from?
Yes, ma'am. According to the official lab report that I base this information on, the source of DNA for items R1, R2, and R3 thus far have been to Officer Gregory Benner.
Thank you. This is, which one are you going to start with?
Okay. The right side?
On the right side we have State's Exhibit 60.
Okay, so this is evidence item R4. This I classified as a transfer stain. This is a non-spatter stain with regular margins. Again, I talked about the margins. There aren't any protuberances or spines on these margins. They're regular in nature, nothing outside of that. There's also, the way that these stains are created is when a bloodied object comes into contact with another object. So in this case, a bloodied object came into contact with the roadway.
And again, what was the result of the labs for this stain?
It ended up being, the source of DNA was Officer Gregory Benner.
Moving to the left is State's Exhibit 53.
It's another depiction of that same area. Left.
Okay. So on the left you have State's Exhibit 467.
Okay, and this is evidence marker R5, which again is pattern transfer stain, regular margins, non-spatter stain, And there were also, in this stain, there were also what are called swipe stains. And swipe stains are created when a bloodied object moves in a lateral direction against another object. And in this case, it appears that a bloodied part of the DNA returns to Officer Benner. So a bloodied part of Officer Benner was either turned or he turned laterally and swiped his whatever was bleeding onto the roadway.
Okay, on the right we have State's Exhibit 61.
And that's, again, that's another photograph of the pattern transfer and the swipe stain. Top left.
So on the left we have State's Exhibit 468.
Okay, and that's an overview, basic overview photograph of where the relationship between R6 and some of the other blood evidence. The middle photograph is a closer photograph of just what R6 is, and the far right photograph is a more close-up view of R6.
So the middle photograph would be State's Exhibit 62, and the right photograph would be State's Exhibit 469. Now, again, what were the lab results for these stains?
Lab results returned to Officer Gregory Benner. And these particular stains, again, they're regular margin stains created with a transfer of blood, a bloodied object from one object to another. One of the things that's indicative of a pattern transfer stain is angular demarcations, lines or curves, anything that you can kind of make out characteristic-wise, that would also help to define what a pattern transfer stain is. So.
And how does it help define it?
Well, sometimes there will be an image in the actual pattern, like a bloodied knife or a bloodied footprint or something like that, that you can actually recognize, and sometimes they're just characteristics, a line, a curve, something like that. The left, top left.
Okay, so that would be State's Exhibit 470.
Okay, this would be another kind of overview photograph showing location of the R7 evidence cone in relation to other evidence cones. And the other photograph, the bottom right,
Which is a State's Exhibit 471.
I classified as another pattern transfer stain, again with regular margins, where blood is on a bloodied object, it transfers to another object. So
And the lab showed what from these stains?
the DNA source returns to Tabitha Littles.
And when are you able to recognize the source of a pattern transfer?
If we have an item like a bloodied shoe on hand, and we're able to go back to the scene and you know, take good photographs of that, basically what we'll do then is send that back to the lab for comparison.
And in this case, were you ever able to do that?
In this case, no, I never examined Miss Littles, and so no.
Okay. And which one?
Top right.
Top right would be State's Exhibit 64.
Okay, the top right is again another overview photograph. Usually we try to do that just for location of the R8 cone in relation to some of the other evidence cones. Then the top right.
The other two photographs are State's Exhibit 65 and 67. I'm not exactly sure which one is which.
Okay, so the pattern itself, I classified it as a pattern transfer stain, and the source of DNA returns to Officer Gregory Benner. The pattern had regular margins, no protuberances or spines, and had clear curves and line characteristics in it that actually appeared to kind of mirror each other, the top left and the top right. So.
What does that mean to you?
Just that it's either something of the same nature either rolled or was folded onto that surface, so it kind of creates like a mirror image of itself. Top left.
Top left is State's Exhibit 472.
Okay, it's another overview photograph of R9 cone to show location in relation to some of the other cones. Then you have the bottom photograph,
I believe that's State's Exhibit 72.
which shows the stain in relation to the cone, and then the top right
State's Exhibit 69.
is another photograph, close-up view photograph of that stain. 9 through 12 I classified as drip trail stains. Again, there was some elliptical shape to the stains, and the stains were a little bit more elongated and showing a little bit more of a motion and directionality into the stains. The stains themselves, I believe R9 returned to Officer Gregory Benner, and as we move through the slides, you'll see that that the DNA source for 10 through 12 returned to a James Stalter. So this would indicate to me that Mr. Stalter, through some way, had Officer Benner's blood on his person, and not only was dripping his blood, but also was dripping Officer Benner's blood as well.
The first one is State's Exhibit 74.
Okay, and that's, again, R10, or evidence item 10, and that's going to be part of the R9 through 12, which are the drip trail stains. In that stain, as I said, the source for DNA returned from 10 through 12 returned to Mr. James Stalter.
Okay. So are there three? How many pictures are there?
There are 3 pictures, but they're part of the same. So 9 through 12 is considered a drip trail stain.
I see. Okay. So I believe that's State's Exhibit 74, 75, 76, and 79. On the left, we have State's Exhibit 87.
Okay, and that's going to be evidence cone R13, which I classified as a pattern transfer stain. Again, there were regular margins within this stain. It was a little bit more difficult to see. It seemed like that maybe it came from maybe a shoe or something that already had blood on it, and by the time it got lab results came, source DNA was Officer Gregory Benner.
On the right, we have State's Exhibit 88. Oh, moving on. Okay, let's see. Actually, can I have these photos because I'm a little bit lost. Okay. All right. So we are actually, the top left is State's Exhibit 87.
Okay, and that's an overview photograph of some of the blood stains that I identified basically to the southwest of Officer Benner's police vehicle.
Okay.
Then moving to the top middle
That would be State's Exhibit 88.
was another overview photograph showing yardsticks laid out next to those stains.
And what do the yardsticks show? What are you showing us with yardsticks?
Just the total length of that drip trail.
Okay. And what does that tell you?
It just, I'm just trying to establish where the first blood drop that I see versus when the last blood drop that I see.
Okay, and this came back to who?
The source of DNA came back to Miss Tabitha Littles.
Okay. All right. And moving on.
And then after that, there's just the measurements of the blood stains themselves.
Okay. Go ahead and take your seat.
Okay.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot of photos, and so in your expert opinion, what does all of this mean?
Well, going through from trying to explain this. Going through R1, which was, according to what I observed, was where the first bloodletting event occurred. If I could maybe show you on the diagram.
Your Honor, you stepped on. All right, is this the diagram?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's do this, Your Honor. May I swap to the Elmo? And then if you stand right here, you can talk to the jury and show them what you're talking about. Just a little. Is that good?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so R1 being here is where the first bloodletting event occurred, or next to there. That's where the random drips were located. So that's where it indicated that whatever dripping item that now we know DNA source returned to Officer Gregory Benner was dripping blood at that particular area. He then moved, or the bloodied object then moved westward, where we have the gush splash stain, which is the larger volume of stain that hit about 90 degrees to the ground, indicating that Officer Benner was positioned closer to the ground at that point. We then went to stain 2, which was a drip trail stain. The drip trail stain had motion and directionality, showing the bloodied object moving from south to north. Next to that, we have R3, which was the bloodied object, again, moving from south to north, and also it appeared that there was something independent that was moving from east to west as part of that stain as well. Then we moved on to R4 here, where we saw transfer stains, which again is when a bloodied object comes into contact with another object. So blood source onto the roadway, and R5 was basically the same, a blood source onto the roadway. Number 6, we have a pattern transfer stain. Here, yeah, pattern transfer stain, oh, excuse me, number 6 is here, pattern transfer stain. DNA source returns to Gregory Benner. Then we have number 7, a pattern transfer stain, where DNA source returns to Tabitha Littles. Moving on to a pattern transfer stain again, I believe returning to Officer Gregory Benner. Then we have drip trail stains 9 through 12. That number 9 returned to DNA source of Officer Benner. 10 through 12 returned to James Stalter. Then we have 13 was a pattern transfer that DNA source returned to Officer Benner. And then we had a drip trail here, R14, which DNA source returned to Tabitha Littles.
All right.
Okay.
Your Honor, may I have just a moment? I'll pass the witness room.
Good afternoon, Agent.
Good afternoon.
So I'm going to show you what's previously been marked as States 42. And, all right, so do you recognize States 42?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I'll show you what's been marked States 397. Well, in States 42, the orange cones, those are blood, correct?
Yes, sir.
And if you look closely, the resolution on this overhead projector is a little iffy, but each one of those cones have a number on them, right?
Yes, sir.
And I will show you what's been marked as States 397. 397 is a diagram of the scene as well, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And am I correct that the orange or the reddish orange markers in this exhibit 397 are going to correspond in their location as the orange cones in 42?
Yes, sir.
So when the jury goes back into the jury room and they hold number 42 up, and they're looking at 42 and they're looking as a point of reference at 397, your testimony today is the orange cones will correspond, correct?
Very, very close. Yes, approximately. Yes.
And you've been qualified as an expert witness in blood,
Yes, sir.
blood pattern recognition
Analysis, yes, sir.
analysis, something big.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so your testimony today is that the jury can use these two diagrams and they'll correspond roughly when they're doing their analysis.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So let's take a look then. And one of the things that that number 397 does not have, it does not have the green markers, right?
Oh, that's correct.
Markers. I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification previously as 396. Now 396 is also a scene diagram that has green markers, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when the jury is looking at 396, that's going to be the same diagram roughly with the location of the vehicle, just with evidence markers, the green ones, rather than the orange ones, right?
I would say that should be the case, yes. I didn't do this diagram and had really nothing to do with the green cones very much, so.
Let me show you 42.
Okay.
42, we've already identified as a photograph, an overall photograph of the scene, right?
Yes, sir.
And it looks like, while there may be some green cones that aren't on this, the green cones correspond with the orange cones that you diagrammed in in state 397.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So you've made some determinations regarding sources of blood and such in this case, correct?
I went off of the lab reports for the source of blood, yes, sir.
Well, first of all, you identified what you believe to be blood stains at the scene, right?
Pretty evident blood stains, given the nature of the scene, yes, sir.
And there were some large stains, which you described as transfer stains, right?
Yes, sir.
And they're numbered 1 through 14, I believe, right?
The swabs?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you've identified, do you have your report in front of you? Or?
I do, yes, sir.
Oh, okay. So if you have questions, please don't think I'm trying to trick you. If you
Okay.
need to refer to your report, please do.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
So you've identified several patterns, several blood stains, and you have been able to refer to the corresponding DNA report to identify their source, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. Those all belong, those all can be associated with Officer Bennett, correct?
Can you repeat those again?
Sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8.
And number 13.
Yeah, right, I'm getting to third. I'm just doing.
Oh, okay.
so
Yeah,
there's some
sorry.
in between that have a mixture of DNA, right?
There were some drops that were of another source DNA.
Okay.
Yes.
And the Mr. Stalter was identified as a source of DNA in this case, right? Blood DNA.
That's correct.
Okay. Did you learn later that he injured his hand while he was assisting Officer Benner?
I did.
Okay. And so we can account for Mr. Stalter as a source of DNA that was contributed to rendering aid, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And those are markers 9, 10, 11, and 12, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So 7 and 14. And can you step down here for just a second? So
Yes, sir.
Use my pen to point to the jury. 7 and 14 are associated by DNA with Tabitha Littles, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, can you point to them?
Okay, number 7 is here,
Okay.
and number 14 is here.
Okay. And thank you very much. You can go back. And when you look at the state's exhibit, you looked at it a moment ago. It's G12, which was a bloody sock, right? You remember being shown a sock or a
I do. I don't recall the green cone number to it though, but
If I said it was G12, would you have any reason to disbelieve me?
no, sir.
Okay.
G12.
All right, and you know from the lab results that bloody sock has DNA belonging to Tabitha Littles, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then let's see and then number 13, which is right there, right?
Yes, sir.
That DNA testing attributed that blood swab to Officer Greg Benner, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, one of the things that you testified about earlier was kind of a sequential order, the order that you kind of attributed the blood pattern to, right?
For Officer Gregory Benner.
Officer Benner, right?
Yes, sir.
And so and we have the directionality. Let's see if I can make this come on. There we go. Now we have the pointer is north, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so you attributed the directionality of this blood pattern to be going from the south to north, roughly, Officer Benner, or the blood pattern to be from south to north, right?
Beginning east, traveling west,
Okay.
and then from south to north. Yes, sir.
Very good. And ultimately, with number 13 being just to the north of Officer Benner's driver's side door, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, one of the things that blood spatter or blood pattern analysis, you can tell where a blood swab is on the street, right? You know that the swab from number 13 belonged to Officer Benner, right?
Once I found that out from the lab report, yes, sir.
Okay. And you can judge from the way, you talked about a drip pattern, right?
Yes, sir.
As opposed to, say, let's see, what was the word you used? Well, there's several different kinds of patterns, correct?
Yes.
And tell the jury some different kinds of patterns.
Cast-off patterns, drip trail patterns, gush patterns, spurt patterns. There's very many.
And cast off would be perhaps if I'm stabbing with a knife, right?
That's
And
correct.
when I go down, a downward motion, and then when I come back, that's going to be the linear pattern back and forth, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And that's kind of a crude example, but I mean, you see that some, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you didn't see, there was no cast off in the situation, right?
No, sir.
Okay, and you can determine directionality by the blood pattern itself from the source, right?
By the shape of the stain and by any spines on the outer portion of the margins would lead us to believe that the individual or bloodied object was moving in a certain direction. Yes, sir.
And that's how you can tell the jury that you believe that the source of blood from 1 through 13, which is determined to be Officer Benner's, was moving in this northerly direction from east to west, right? Did I get that right? The time of the first gunshot, correct?
No, sir.
With the blood swabs now that you testified to that are associated with Miss Little's, right? Number 7 and number 14.
Yes.
Correct. None of your testimony is intended to show where Miss Little's was, where all we know is blood came from her body and dripped at number 7 and number 14, right?
Pattern transfer on number 7 and drip trail stains on number 14. Yes, sir.
But nothing about where she might have been standing before or before she began blood began to leave her body or was transferred to the pavement, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. And that's not your area of expertise. You're not trying to, none of your testimony is designed to offer evidence of where Miss Little's was before, say, shots were fired, right?
No, sir.
Oh, you use the term something independent. Which pattern or transfer were you talking about? It was something independent.
That was going to be R number 3, R3. So which would have been a drip trail stain.
Okay. From Officer Benner.
From DNA source came back from Officer Benner, yes.
And when you talk about something independent, what are you referring to?
Well, the other drip trail, which was listed as R2, stayed pretty consistent in its orientation from south to north, and number 3 was moving south to north and then moved east to west, which would indicate to me that there was something that was bleeding on that blood source that was moving independently of the rest of the object or Officer Benner.
Oh, I mean, perhaps like a second wound, a secondary wound, like an arm wound as opposed to a body wound.
Or a leg wound or opposed to an arm wound or what have you, yeah. Something independent was moving, yes.
All right. Thank you, sir, for your time. Pass the witness.
Vargas, I believe that you had indicated that R13, which is the stain that defense was asking you about, was a transfer stain, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and is it possible that the blood in that transfer...
Speculation.
Your Honor, this is an
Still
expert.
speculation.
What are the possible ways that the blood could be transferred to that spot?
The blood that was dripping from a source, point source, could have, in my opinion, in having conducted the analysis, it was created by the transfer of blood from one object to another, being a transfer stain. So the pattern itself being a regular margin pattern with no spines or protuberances. It wasn't circular or elliptical in shape, which would indicate it was some kind of spatter stain. So that negates all spatter stains, so it would have to be in the non-spatter family. Being the physical characteristics that I saw, it appeared to be that it was just a pattern transfer stain.
Okay, but a pattern transfer stain, what does that mean?
It means that there are either an image that you recognize or certain characteristics, lines, curves, circular demarcations, something like that.
So possibly from an object?
A foot, a shoe, something that had maybe an elbow that had blood on it and met the ground at that particular point. I mean, it could be a number of objects that had blood and then transferred that blood to the asphalt or the roadway.
I see. No further questions, Your Honor?
Is this for the
Yes, from the state, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.